there's 5 minutes. I mean, you're going to record 5 minutes.
It's already 10:30.
Oh, this is
10:25.
Okay, so my phone is not. Okay, so then let's start. This phone is
not working.
What's the last name? Omara?
Yeah. Omara.
Hello?
Bryan Omara?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ganesh Koru. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Information Systems at UMBC.
Hi, this is
Hey,
Eli.
how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
So I hope you're enjoying the holidays. And so thank you very much for giving your time, and I apologize for the rescheduling. I had to fill in a position like we explained in an earlier email. So we greatly appreciate it. Did you have a chance to look over the questions we had?
I did, yeah.
This is in the scope of a project funded by the Maryland Department of Health, of course. So you know David, and but we also received an approval from our institutional review board because we had to do with all research projects involving human and animal subjects. So basically, as a part of that, we let everybody know that if there are questions that you would like us to skip, and there are issues that you don't want to discuss, if there are confidential areas, definitely you don't have to discuss that with us. And this is not, of course, a research in child psychology. This was approved by seeing that there is no more than minimal harm, but feel free to let us know. So I'll start with the first question, and would you tell us about your role in MDH and how is it related to health data?
Sure. So I have had several roles. I started as a claims adjuster.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, the data entry team would enter claims into our system, and if there was an issue with what they entered, meaning if there was human error, or if based on some type of change in the billing, if there was changes to the billing later on to be made, I would go in and enter that and change that data.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I have entered claim data before that required special authorization process for payment. So I've evaluated, claim data and determined, based on, certain circumstances that were, special, unique. I could have paid them or denied them, and then right now I'm a supervisor. It's not really a health data role, but right now I am a supervisor of a provider enrollment. So right now I guess I supervise the data entry of providers when they enroll.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So is there a title for this to describe your role in MDH dealing with these data-related activities?
In my two previous roles, the title was Medical Care Program Associate 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then right now, in my current role, I am a medical care program specialist too.
Great. So, of course, we are interested in more than one all of the data domains, including claims, provider data, procedure data. Actually, Yili, who's sitting with us today, wrote some programs to detect some of the problems with the provider and procedure subsets in the MMIS system. So we have this concept called data defect. So it's basically a discrepancy between the actual and expected correct values for a data item. So based on your experience, could you give us, to start with, some examples of data defects, perhaps the most striking or important ones from your context?
There are, sure. So, I'm trying to think how to start with this. HIPAA is always sort of a controversial thing, because the rules in place for HIPAA are in many cases too overprotective, so and also vague. So a lot of times, one example in particular is when a lot of times when HIPAA determines certain requirements for claims, through on the federal end, the state end also has their own requirements which don't exactly match, and sometimes, like right now, an issue that we face is in many different ways is when a provider submits a claim electronically. The way that we are supposed to receive and interpret that claim electronically is different. Is not exactly the same as what the federal government mandates. So we of course we do receive and interpret it as the federal government would like, but when we do that, the way we actually use that data is sort of counter. The logic is lost as far as what we do with that data once we've received it the way the federal government tells us to receive it in a certain way. So it's for example, there's information on claims that the federal government doesn't require, and the state government does. So we can only require what the federal government tells us that we can require, and then when we again, this is when claims are sent electronically, when we need to go back and perform audits to determine use specific data to determine whether or not claims were paid twice or not. That specific information is sometimes lost. We don't because we weren't able to require that. So a lot of times, and that's an issue in itself, is how much information is required in order to accurately, pay or process claims, because the more information you need, the more difficult it is to process a claim. But at the same time, the more information you have allows for a lot more issues to come into play. Another example I can think of is where a lot of times this is getting very, very specific. I don't know how specific do you want me to get?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you go to some specific things as well. Right.
Great. So they, I mean, because there are so many different units and policies, things don't exactly match.
Mm-hmm.
So, one specific issue I can think of is where we have cases where, patients have been told, their Medicaid was enabled, but we may not have that in our system yet. So the patient thinks that they might have Medicaid, but they don't have it. They don't have it as far as set up fully as far as billing is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when a patient goes to see a provider and they verify whether or not the billing system can accept them or not, and if the billing system doesn't confirm that, then they're allowed to bill the patient. Now, when they send a claim over to us and we process it, their claim might say that they billed the patient, but by the time it reaches us, we may have actually changed the patient's information system to say, maybe the patient is active for Medicaid that day. It's retroactive.
Mm.
So going back and saying, to the provider says, well, how come you didn't pay my claim? And we say, well, your claim said that you billed the patient. And that's a case where the patient's paying more than our allowable. Mm. So we don't owe you. But you have to pay the patient back first.
Oh.
And the provider might say, well, you pay us first, and then we pay the patient. Well, it doesn't quite work like that, but that's always that's a thing where that's a situation where there are multiple parts of a process as far as claims, and eligibility are concerned, and if things don't line up properly over time, there's discrepancies in data from the providers and Medicaid's end, and it especially affects the patient because they may not fully understand all the intricacies of how we work things out, and a lot of times determining as to whether or not the patient is responsible for certain things can be difficult because of that. But there are certain things that we battle on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. So sort of making sure that information on everybody's end is up to date, mm-hmm. As quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, we have, we have like surrogate surrogate payers for Medicaid, like managed care organizations. Where they receive updates from us maybe once a week, and sometimes it would be more beneficial if they could receive it every day. But there are a lot of system limitations that sort of come into play with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. I mean, you gave us such sophisticated two examples that these are very good, I think, representative examples related to how it is so dynamic. Because when I talk about data defects, often people think that it is like a defect on an item or shirt, and if you just fix the input mechanisms, you're not going to accept bad data into the system. But it's not only that. Sometimes data just may remain static, but the external environment, the regulations may change, and then it may actually be at that point subject to many discrepancies. And the second example is also very good because there are some temporal aspects to this. So you may actually get to the good data, but by the time you achieve that purpose, it may be too late.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is something that actually nobody brought up before, right? So currently we develop tools, but still I don't know whether we can get to that point. But yeah, very good examples. Thank you. So But generally speaking, that defects detract from the quality of data, and so we say that higher number of defects are associated with lower data quality. Through which mechanisms and how do you realize or know about data quality problems? There is high number of defects in your data.
How do I find data
quality problems?
Data quality problems. From my experience, it's usually because it's usually from calls. I have a great deal of my experience is talking to providers directly, and in some cases, patients will call and become involved as well. I've never had the opportunity to work with patients to over the phone with their eligibility to a great extent, because that's just not a unit or job that I've ever worked in. But most of my roles here have been working directly with providers, and they will always explain an issue from their perspective, and a lot of the problems that stem from that are the software that they're using. What is it called? Their clearinghouse software, their the software that they, or the company that's subscribed to create their billing system is always it's basically they're trying to but they don't have a way to interact directly with us, so a lot of times they're calling to us to find that information to update their system. So we don't just divulge all of our personal or private information about patients and about patient eligibility and things like that to the provider. They usually have to call and find out, and they're constantly having to update that. And a lot of times their interpretation of how a claim should be processed is obviously not up to date with ours. So that we have that's usually the first thing to figure out is, okay, are you showing what we are showing? Because the information ultimately comes from us. So you need to update your information first, and then we can agree upon how this claim should be processed.
So thanks. So then, would it be accurate to say that you get to know about data quality problems as the operational problems emerge in the field, and then
Exactly,
you have to basically react to those, and then that's how you know.
Precisely.
Okay. So if we now consider a concept called data quality improvement, it's basically identifying data defects and tracking them to their resolution to ensure data is corrected. So to what extent do you think data quality improvement is necessary, in your opinion, and why would your organization need data quality improvement?
Data quality improvement is completely necessary. It is the way that you collect that data and also define what that data actually means is so important. A piece of data, as far as what it means to us, doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to the provider, and that all comes from creating a standardized form of how to interpret that data. That's not quite easy, because we live in a society where we're a capitalistic society, and allowing certain businesses to determine what the best way to interpret data is part of their their selling point. When these providers, choose a clearinghouse to do their billing, and they provide them the software that they use to collect and organize all their data. They say, well, here's how we organize our data, and it's easy to read and use, and we have a great graphic user interface and everything. As opposed to that company, here's why you want to choose us, and that's great for innovation and improvement and things like that. But as far as discovering where, I think right now we're very much in infancy of trying to collect data and understand it. So we're going through sort of a rough patch right now, trying to figure out what the best way to interpret and collect all this is. And the same thing here with us. When we choose a vendor, the state chooses a vendor to perform certain roles for us as far as collecting data. It's tough to determine who is going to offer us the best resource for that, and what kind of selling points they have. But I mean, if you were to just standardize everything and say, hey, this is how you have to do it, that doesn't create a whole lot of competition. Mm-hmm. And it also, because policies are always changing, you can't always create a standardized method of determining these certain pieces of data either. So it's always important to keep. You can't turn your back away from it for a second. You have to keep changing the data as it comes in, and recognizing that it's changing, and know how to go about fixing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the standards versus business interests, it's always a recurring theme, right? So you're on the administration domain, but we keep hearing the same thing for hospitals or telehealth vendors, you name it. And so we mentioned the operational needs, and so I guess if data is of better quality, then those operations would be smoother. So what are the other areas your organization would need data quality improvement? Or what are the other reasons why your organization would need quality improvement data in terms of data?
Other reasons why we would need quality data improvement? Mm-hmm. Probably, I mean, it would eliminate overspending and also eliminate underspending. There are times when there should be more money invested into certain providers or things. They're collecting that data. Knowing, I mean, that's a hard question. And I hope I'm answering these questions.
You're exactly on target.
Why? I mean, ultimately, this in this particular field, it impacts the public. Mm-hmm. So you're creating a better, you're creating an easier, a better society, a healthier society. Mm-hmm. There's a data to biological transition here. I mean, your data, impacts people's livelihood and well-being, and whether they survive or not. If a provider doesn't accept Medicaid because they have no incentive to, it's harder for people to get treatment. Yeah. It's harder for them to live healthy. Mm-hmm. So that's a very important reason to collect to identify data defects.
Yeah. So, if we think about the data quality problems, what are the most time-consuming issues? I know you mentioned a number of them, but if we rank and look at the most time-consuming issues, what would those be because of data quality problems?
I guess the ones that are still paper oriented.
Mm-hmm.
You can right now we're still very much stuck in using hard copies of everything and paper. We haven't gone completely electronic yet by a long shot, and changing, identifying the problem and changing it, by paper, is, on an individual basis, that takes a lot of time and energy. Whereas when you have, when you're dealing with, data on a computer, a lot of times you can make mass changes all at once. I think that's, and the most time-consuming issues, I think, are the ones that don't have enough, we don't have enough help on. I think that a lot of times, you have a specific issue that, and because it falls within a certain department that has a certain, budget limit, and may not have been discovered until after that budget was set. That department is not necessarily equipped to handle that type of issue. So, later on, it becomes a timely issue because there's not enough people to, tackle it.
So you were talking about the time-consuming issues when it comes to improvement of data quality, or data quality issues that occur because of data quality? Lack of data quality.
Yeah, the latter.
Latter, okay. So, and then if we shift to the dollar amount, so sometimes, there is one-to-one match, but sometimes not. There are data quality problems that cost a lot of money that you are aware of.
Yeah.
What would those be?
This is number 5. So, the ones where we're out of date. We're using a system that's MMIS. You've been made aware of the system you use called MMIS. And, the language used to build it was COBOL. And there's a shift in economy and society where there's nobody. It's hard to find someone who knows how to not just write scripts in COBOL, but also is efficient in it, because everybody's moved on to more efficient languages to write data, to write script in, and the most costly issues with data quality are having to do with the limitations of the system that we have. You can only create such a system that has so many capabilities with a certain language, and the people remaining who know how to use it. that's another issue in itself. I think that the cost of finding someone, and it becomes a reverse situation where even though it's not needed anymore, that person is the only person that they know that they're in high demand again, because there aren't many people who know that language anymore. I don't feel with hiring and that field sort of, I only am aware of that because my mother used to work with that sort of thing in DHMH. So
well, these are excellent points. Actually, I try to explain that this is actually a software evolution problem as well, because we are in a fast changing field in terms of IT, and COBOL served great purposes, but now there are of course newer platforms, newer languages, so software, and also it becomes like a glue that holds everything together. If it cannot change, then we end up with these systems. Some part of it is actually not entirely avoidable, but there are better ways to handle it. I think there is an entire field called software maintenance and evolution, and there are strategies that can be followed. And I'm sure I'm sure DHMH followed some of those, but it may not be sufficient. I don't know. I don't know too much about the history. I just know that it started in 1990s, right? MMIS as a system. I would be very interested in learning more about it.
It's a system that, actually it's in its second variation, and it was originally created or launched in the 80s, I think.
80s, okay.
And then in its second version, we call it MMIS2. It launched in 1995. So the current system we have is still is sort of just the same thing. I mean, there have been changes and tweaks added to it, but it's the same thing since 1995. I don't know if it's worth mentioning or not, but I think that I'm not a software developer either, but I think the problem we have is as we move forward, there's not enough attention focused on backwards compatibility. I think it's and again there might be a reason for that. Maybe that drives incentive to adapt that new type of software out there, but and form of data collecting. But the software out there isn't very backwards compatible with ours. So when we receive claims through electronic data interchange, like all providers do, and they transmit and receive claims, we have to have a way of converting that information to something compatible with what we have, and things get lost along the way. And you have to create more workarounds for that.
Yeah. So of course, patches over patches. Also, even if you create those workarounds, then the future workarounds shouldn't break those workarounds. So it becomes more and more complex as well.
Yeah, exactly. You got that right.
I mean, my opinion, of course, this is your interview, but I think it's okay to share opinions. A lot of interest was in the previous decades. It was basically on functionality and providing functionality. So some of the things like data structures, data standards took the back seat. And now we are in the data analytics, data science era. So now we look at what exists in these systems, and it is less than ideal, unfortunately.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the next one. So how do you currently perform data quality improvement, and what are the existing approaches, steps, and tools?
I don't think I have anything new for this one. I just, we again, on a more very specific level, we will go into each claim or each payment and fix the data. We're not allowed to fix claim data if it's old enough. So we will actually then just fix payment. So there's sort of a way of showing that, and just making sure that after at a certain point audits have to be performed on the actual collection, and you don't want to go back and change things after it's been audited.
So before audit, it is changed using manual steps, basically, through direct data.
Exactly. Yeah.
So do you perform it yourself, or you send it to others? So are there forms for this type of change?
We have forms that we can fill out, or providers can fill out to change claim information, and we will manually key those changes into our computers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So in these manual activities, what are the most important recurring day-to-day problems based on your experiences, and what causes them? So I'm talking about now the activity of basically correcting the data. What are the recurring problems?
Okay. Probably version control.
Okay.
Because when you change something, sometimes I don't know that. I think the concept of version control has been out for a long time. It's before I ever knew about it. But our system doesn't have the most sophisticated understanding of it. Of course, when you change it, so for example, sometimes we might have a case where there are two claims different claims that affect each other.
Mm-hmm.
And if you change one of them, then the other one is unaffected by it. The system doesn't know that. It doesn't actively, so you think that. So you actually have to sometimes go into that one and have to force, you have to force, errors that it, having to force errors that, it thinks are there. If special codes or whatever that it thinks that you're having to authorize, but you really shouldn't have to. And you might not even know that it's still hung up on that other claim until somebody calls and finds out about it. So it's difficult to know what it's actually thinking. Sometimes, when two different things are conflicting with each other, and you fixed one of them, but you weren't aware of that it still thinks that there's an issue with the other. Mm-hmm. Because it didn't identify, it didn't compare it to the change that you already made. Basically, I'm trying to say, I guess. Mm-hmm. That's a limitation that we face, and you just sort of, I don't know all the version control capabilities that we have, except that it's not easy to go back to it's not always easy to go back to a very specific point in time as you would like. Sometimes you have to wipe out an entire day's work of and that's costly as well. I guess that's something I could have mentioned before. You just to correct one thing, you have to actually affect everything else around it and go back and then identify what wasn't done, and everybody, if it affects multiple things, everybody has to go back in and rekey things.
Mm-hmm. Great. So basically, rework caused by the dependencies and version control, and it costs money, time. Great.
But we might not even we might not even be able to catch all the things that you go back and you try to remember everything that you did key in that day, and you might not find everything. So things get lost along the way too. There's that dependency to track certain things by physical papers and things like that. That interaction with software. In my mind, it would be nice if there could be some sort of report run to say like, oh, well, the system would say, because I went back to this version at this time of day, here's all the things that you keyed in that I couldn't take in it, and then you make sure you do all that. There's no reports or checks like that. Well, we don't have any, but those things I think are very necessary.
Mm-hmm. So we are currently developing some software here which will basically keep track of versions. But at the end of the day, you will have to bring your data into this new system, because we cannot obviously modify MMIS or any other provider enrollment system that you get from another vendor. So my question to you, that do you think it will be feasible for you, let's say, to import your data, which may be a sub part of the data set that you want to improve the quality, and then basically keep the versions of that in the system that we will be developing?
Oh, that part. No, you are involved with a new system that we could be adapting.
Yeah. Not in the next 2-3 months, but so this is basically a research project. We're in the middle of it. We've spent about 1.5 years now, right? So it's a 3-year project. So the first year we spent time with how to basically create constraints on the data and then detect data defects, and we looked at the provider and procedure subsystems. So we created a taxonomy of data defects and developed software tools to effectively and efficiently, in a fast manner, detect them and prepare quality reports for the data. So for the second year, we are looking at basically how to version the data and then make sure that those defects they belong to a version, and then you can keep track of the quality improvement on the data as you make improvements. The other portion is also related to the business rules and structured business rules and data constraints, which will be enforced on the data. So we version them as well. I think it's going to interesting places. Of course, we develop research-based prototypes here, but they are, I think, pretty usable. I think David started to use our product from the first year, which is just detecting defects. So we are hoping that in the second year we also produce something useful, and then third year maybe we can start collecting data about its usage by people in the department. So that's our hope.
That's great. Yeah, I'd love for there to be changes and fixes and ways to identify all those issues. But about what you're saying, you're asking me your question. Well, I don't want to forget. I don't have a lot of experience with exporting data. Again, I know right now that. David could probably tell you more about this. Right now, we're working with a new vendor, exporting our provider enrollment data to them. They don't. There was an extended period of time when we were supposed to, shut down our, for version control purposes, shut down, what we updated in our system so that it could, things could be carried on to theirs. And, we could properly check to make sure that they did accurately accept every piece of data that we did. That it was in our system. And, in that period of time, you've got a lot of providers who are, having issues, and that they need their payments. They need payments made. So, we make exceptions, and the exceptions need exceptions. So we end up seeing changes on our end, and we now have to make sure that we have to track those to make sure that those changes are made into our new vendors and as well. And verifying whether those things actually happen or not isn't easy. There's a lot of personal accountability there. That's that's not always the greatest, but.
So this is great. Actually, it's similar to, for example, system maintenance shutdowns you see, and that was originally developed that was originally done for software upgrades, feature upgrades. But now you're saying when you want to do data quality improvement, again, you have to basically intervene and stop the operations, and then it creates further problems.
Yeah. Especially for a month. I mean, there was we had. I mean, apparently that we had anticipated that there would just be a month's worth of gap there, but there ended up being longer than that for other reasons.
So do you think in an environment like that, people may actually want to avoid dealing with data quality problems because it may sound like doing a lot of chores, which may be risky, even disrupting operations? So
I also just while it's on my mind, I don't know if it's either here or there, but I know that in my experience, we in MMIS, just there are a lot of bugs, things that where you think that you're correcting something, but you're actually making bugs. It makes things worse, and and the bugs I think have always been, especially in the past 10 years or so, been a big issue for us because I don't think we've had an understanding of how to fix those bugs without making things worse. I know that it just when my mother was on board with the infancy of MMIS2 back in '95, they actually ended up making a great deal of changes internally. So the vendor that we bought the software from, they instead of going to them to make certain changes, we had a few people that knew the system well enough where we could make them ourselves. But those people move on or they retire, and you're lost.
Yeah.
And you don't have that anymore. So you always have to figure out ways to work, understand the system's full capabilities and understand what alternate solutions you have. So there's no. I think that one of the biggest issues is that I look at my cabinet right now, and I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different 2-inch binders just filled with these really old printouts of how MMIS2 works.
Oh.
And I've had the chance to sort of breeze through them and laugh at them because of how simplistic they are. But it's I know that who the hell is going to sit down and read these? I personally I've taken it upon myself to make my own sort of standard operating procedures to outline what MMIS does in Microsoft Word, and I with screenshots and bookmarks and things like that, where I can check that. I don't so that, even if for some reason I was to leave or retire, somebody else could look at that because your system is so complex. It's, you're never going to train someone. You have to have a way to understand that. And I think it has to be reasonable too. I mean, again, no, I don't. These 8 binders filled with papers, probably thousands of pages, are great, but you're never. No one ever looks at them. They just collect dust. I think if there was a better way to figure out how people learn to use software, and teach them how to use the software they have to their fullest capabilities, most of us are visual learners, I think, and they do it by experience. So that's really important. I think I don't know if that helps out or not, but that's always been a concern.
So, if, for example, there was a data dictionary type of software available to everybody, and they could do searches and maybe learn about what information and data standards constraints are there in MMIS.
Exactly.
Maybe.
Yeah. So if we had a way to say, like, oh well, I want to make this change in the system. If there was a way without trying to go through thousands of pages, from 1995, and say, like, how is our system going to react to this type of change? Documenting those type of things to say, like, okay, these are the brains, in layman's terms, of what the system does. Here's how, but that's not easy in itself, because you have to organize. You have to make it easy to navigate. The way that you're communicating to someone, the way this thing thinks, is without them being a programmer, is like, whoa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, without being a programmer, right. So, what are the communication and collaboration difficulties in this data quality improvement activities? Would you provide examples?
With communication or collaborative difficulties, I think explain to someone how much a certain data defect, how important it is to fix. I think that other people might not think it's important, but without running reports and evaluating it, because the impact is as much as, I think, is when you're dealing with as many pieces of data as we are. I think that even the smallest defects have much greater influences than we realize. Many of them unmeasurable because of our limitations, but communicating to someone what the issue is and how it impacts you is it's not always easy. I think I don't know, with sometimes with there only being 2 or 3 people in the building that really know how this system works, it's not easy.
So, do you think there are also, if you think about some of the activities and steps that are currently done, is there anything that you see unnecessary or could be eliminated or merged with other things, and why would this be useful?
I don't really think I have a way to answer that question. Another thing, another way I've just thought that how data impacts data defects impact people without understanding. I know that a lot of times, so we have a process where if this, and this is actually pretty significant. If our system doesn't know whether to process a claim or not, it'll go into what we call suspended mode, where it forces a human being to determine, whether it pays or denies and how it does that. Mm-hmm. I think that a lot of times the understanding why, a lot of the times we do that because we don't program this computer to be smart enough to know, and we're also writing so many different policy changes all the time, that the way it used to think isn't the same. Mm-hmm. So, when you tell it to do something different that it didn't used to think, that impacts a great deal of people. Now you need more people to know that new policy and to be able to adapt that and interact with the computer and say, okay, well, based on that new policy, I understand now why you don't know what to do with this claim, whether to, go one way or the other. How do I proceed with that? Mm-hmm. That's a really big issue. You don't have enough people to run reports and know why the computer, did what it did. But the people who wrote the policy to sort of make the computer think differently are communicating that to the people who actually have to interact with it on the other end. And that's been a big issue. Mm-hmm. Great. So the start of the thought process wasn't communicated properly. So people actually had to interact with it. I guess. Mm-hmm. I said that twice. I don't know. I think you get what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. Anyway, yeah, I don't know if I have a way to answer number 11 for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that because there are not formal activities, so this is in our interview protocol, because sometimes organizations with certain formal workflows like credit approval may actually come to realize, oh, this step is not needed, so then you can actually take that entire step out and maybe reduce the time to credit approval. So but I understand, I mean, if there are always kind of reactive type of approaches and lack of maybe formal steps, then it may be difficult to answer. So as a state official, you may be interacting with other states or other organizations, and do you know how they deal with this problem? Are they better? If so, why are they better? And what can MDH learn from them? How can this learning be facilitated?
I don't have I wouldn't have a very detailed answer for. From communicating with providers like I do on a regular basis, I know that other states like Ohio have a much better system than us. That apparently they've bit the bullet and invested tons of money into a better system. I mean, I don't know that for certain. I've never interacted with it. I think really what it is from the provider's perspective, it's very nice. I mean, user quality is so important. I mean, I think that there's not enough. The ease of the simplified graphic user interfaces, are because right now, I don't know if you've ever seen MMIS or if David showed you or not, but it's very much it's just a bunch of characters on a page. There's no, it's just a splatter of information, and it's seemingly unorganized to the untrained eye. I think a lot of people, it harkens back to the days of DOS when there was no graphic user interface, people were very much intimidated by that. But then once, Windows comes along and makes everything nice and easy where you can click on things rather than having to read all kinds of characters all over the place and know certain command lines, that's easy. But I mean, it takes an incredible amount of time to train people to use this thing, and it is intimidating. The people look at this and they think, well, I'm not a nerd. I'm not, this is guy stuff. We have a great deal of women who work here.
Yeah.
They think that this is nerdy stuff. I say that all the time. You gotta have to, go inside yourself and find the inner nerd. You really do. You have to pull that out. And what I do when I train people is I take screenshots of everything and I draw lines everywhere and I say, this is how your mind will interpret this after having used this for several years. You will see this, and your mind will divide this group of text on the page into this block, and then that group of text into that block, and then you will be able to consume all the information on the screen because it's not organized. It's just like someone threw a splatter of ink at it. It's just there's tons of information through the entire screen all the time, and it's not easy to take in all at once. You have to. I know. When I'm looking at someone whose experience as I am with it, when they look at one page, the eye is moving around the monitor like a mile a minute. You're looking at like tons of things all at once, and making that easier for humans to digest, easier to train. That's so huge because it takes a long time to train someone how to use this thing. And if you can simplify things, you always have to assume that the person who's using this is like a child, and many of them really are. I have to train providers how to use our external vendor softwares, our web portals and things like that, and I always have to assume they don't know anything, because they don't, and I have to go through very slowly. They feel very intimidated. Everybody feels intimidated when they start working here, and getting over that psychological. Getting them to defeat that psychological intimidation is a problem. You need to make something that's very user friendly, very easy to digest information, and where they can still see all the details that they need to see, but that they don't have it. It's like thrown at their face. They can still access it if they need to, but I think that a lot of the times, the way that the information is on the screen, it's not necessarily, it doesn't know what information is important, and you have to be that person to find what information is important. It doesn't know what information isn't important to hide. If there's a problem and the information that's creating the problem is there in your face, it's easier to discover the problem and solve it. I'm not really telling you everything you already know. I mean, you're the expert on this. I'm just telling you, how what I experience on a daily basis. I know that
Yeah, I mean, these are great points. Graduating from computer engineering early 90s, I actually produced some of those COBOL programs myself. You can do a good job and bad job in user interface design with any tool. But I agree. I mean, times have changed now. People are accustomed to graphical user interfaces, and you brought some excellent points. So we actually talk about data quality, but we run into these usability issues, and so we are running actually a usability study with the EMIP system. I don't know whether you are aware of that, but it's maybe another group in MDH. So it's basically a web-based system. So we are evaluating its usability. So we find that the vendors didn't pay attention. That there are certain usability problems. And given that the data will come from different systems, not only MMIS. So in the future, if the department requires the vendors to maybe comply with some usability guidelines and principles and evaluate the usability before actually buying these systems, probably it could benefit data quality as well.
Yeah, I just think that psychology isn't something that's taken into account enough when you're doing data entry, because it's really so mundane, and it's, you know, when if you know the interactivity between the person and this whole interface is it's just like it couldn't be two different personalities. So the computer has to have a personality and sort of you know, help the person feel like they accomplished something. You know, help the person feel like they're not looking at the same screen all the time. Helping, you know, the psychology of human-computer interaction is, I think, you know, there's not enough, you know, money or even time invested into it. There's something huge there that Google, you know, of course, we all know the experience you have with any sort of Google application is just always, you know, top notch. You know, I don't think there's, and it's psychology based. It really is that you have the relationship you develop with those applications, with the colors and the way everything, you know. You know, the confidence it gives you, it's incredible.
Mm-hmm. But one thing you said was striking. So vendors actually tell you about other states, right?
Right. Yeah. They always tell us, well, why can't you be like Ohio?
Yeah, but there is a risk of getting this communication over the vendors, because they can actually, I mean, the words can filter according to their interests too, right?
Yeah.
But maybe some states. They could have better systems. That definitely, that's an option. Well, thank you very much. I mean, this was one of the most interesting, exciting interviews I have conducted. So not only in this research, actually, in some of the other, because it was full of some very sophisticated and interesting examples. So we'll transcribe the recording, and then we do now, as a part of qualitative research, we come up with a concept hierarchy. We code the transcripts, and we also do it with multiple individuals. Hopefully the feedback from this is going to benefit the data quality software that we are developing on this end. So that's our hope. So do you have any questions or final comments for us?
No, just good luck. I enjoyed being interviewed by you on this particular thing. It's always nice for someone to hear both my frustrations and concerns, and to know that someone actually cares about them. I mean, not that I'm frustrated with everything about what happened to you. There are plenty of positive things, but I think we're just focused on the improvements right now.
Yeah, I always say our frustrations also keep us busy and employed, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thanks. So Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye bye.
Good day. Bye.
Okay, so great.
Yes, wonderful.
He's a deep thinker too. I mean, it's not that he's telling us a lot of things that we have. So I think the good thing about this interview is it basically tells us that we are on the right track. Yeah. But he also raises some very interesting things. So we can.